Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Rajaa Bokhari. I'm a program manager at the PBC, specifically at its Center of Excellence in Responsible Business. Many of you know us as CERB. We are going to wait a few more minutes before we start. So let's say about 2 to 3 minutes so that we get enough people to join. Then I would love to introduce our executive coach today, Sadaf Javed, and take the conversation from there.
Perfect.
So we have a few people coming in. I do want to make a few things very clear so that we can have a smooth webinar, a very well moderated session. So first of all, I would like for people to use the chat box to introduce themselves. Please tell us which organization you belong to, what's your current job role, and how many years of experience you've had in this role. If you'd like to share some experiences about any coaching that you've taken before, that would be great. I'll also be running a couple of polls throughout to gather that kind of information. And everyone would be on mute. But we will have a Q&A session towards the end of the conversation. In the meantime, please use the chat box or the Q&A box to pose your questions, and then we will ask our guests today to answer them. But I will be taking a look at the questions, noting down what needs to be asked, and then our coach will be answering them. So without further ado, Sadaf, if you could give us a little bit of a background of where your experience lies, what made you decide to be an executive coach, and thank you so much for being here with us. I'm very excited about this personally. Executive coaching and leadership training has been a topic for CERB for as long as we've been around. So it's really exciting to now finally take this forward.
Great. Thank you, Raja, for this. So everyone, I'm Sadaf Javed. Really glad to be here with you all. A bit about my background. So I used to be in Unilever for a good 17 years, started off from Pakistan and eventually moved to London in a global role in 2014. Um, and in 2022, I decided to um, go through a transition of not only becoming a mother, but also at the same time asking some questions related to what is it that I find the most energetic part of my job. Where is it that I feel that I'm most motivated and I can create impact? So I was noticing that the last couple of years in my leadership role in Unilever, I used to get far more excited and engaged in people conversations, even though I'm a hardcore marketer. But the people conversations were, and when I say people, not just consumers, of course, I was like bread and butter and I couldn't do without them. But the people and my team conversations related to their growth and potential, solving those problems and helping them to grow sounded and felt more motivating for me versus sitting in a marketing meeting. And I think when you hit that point in life, you really want to um, take a chance. So I took that chance and I decided to go for a certification in executive coaching because that kind of keeps me in the corporate side and helps me to continue supporting people that I want to. And then I created this company called Quiet Thrivers.
Hmm.
And I kind of help introverted leaders to get out of their shell and help them to thrive in the organization. And
Okay.
I feel that if you kind of end up helping the introverted leaders, you've kind of given space to the rest automatically. Um, and and another area which I focus a lot on helping young leaders, emerging
Hmm.
leaders, high potential performers. And we're going to talk about that more in any case, Raja. That why them and why is coaching important for them. So we'll do that a bit later.
Right. So before we even get into that, I'd also like to understand your motivations behind pursuing executive coaching. So I understand wanting to help people who have a different type of profile to what we imagine a leader looks like. Someone who's more gregarious, someone who enjoys networking, presents really well, etc. All of those skills obviously can be learned by those who may not fit that kind of social profile. But specifically before that, was that your main motivation, or was there something else that you wanted to, change of pace? You wanted to perhaps pursue, like you said, connecting with others in the conversations that you have with people that you've experienced in your time at Unilever?
So it's a bit of all of it. It's a combination of things and
Hmm.
motivations, but I would say that the what I was very clear always is that I want to continue being in the corporate world. That's something I was clear of.
Hmm.
But I had to be very clear on what part of the corporate world I want to create an impact in, or where I want to keep contributing.
Hmm.
And when you move from one role to another, or from one region to another, from one country to another, you go through this whole mode of self awareness,
Okay.
and sometimes you learn it the hard way, or sometimes you have some good people around you who take their time to coach you. Yeah.
Hmm.
And there are few things that I'd always noticed,
Hmm.
that there was in, especially if you're in an FMCG environment, and if the organization is marketing led,
Hmm.
then it becomes that becomes the culture of the organization, that leadership is seen in one way,
Hmm.
that it's usually the most charismatic person, the person with the most amount of gravitas, who kind of creates an impact when they come in the room. And in general terms as well, leadership is usually seen as maybe you're born with it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Some people have some natural inclinations, but with what I've come to the conclusion, and what executive coaching also focuses on, is that no, it's not about that whether you're born with it. You might have some personality inclinations that allow you to take some shortcuts because it just comes naturally to you. But these are skills that could be acquired, but these are skills that can't be, taught to you
Yeah.
in a top down program. Yeah. That, guys, these are 10 slides, do these five things, and you'll be sorted. That's not going to happen. On job training as well is pretty helpful. I would still say that the things that you can learn on the job are amazing, but that little bit of support in the form of executive coaching, it becomes very useful in the long term.
So
So
how?
that, yeah,
No, sorry,
go
go ahead.
ahead.
Okay. I was just
So
saying,
I
how
would
do
say
you?
that.
Okay, I think we're both very excited about this topic, but please continue your thought and then I will ask my next question.
Okay, okay. I'll take your cue on that one. So
Yeah.
I would say see an executive coach as you having your own personal leadership strategist
Hmm. Okay.
sitting with you in your growth. That's the way I would define it.
And I think that's what sets executive coaching apart from a standard training that you would receive. So a leadership training, a few slides, like you said. Um, what would you specifically define as your approach to coaching? And how would it align with the objectives that we have with the program that we're about to launch with you?
Hmm. So I it's a big philosophical question. The
Yeah.
way the approach, obviously, eventually the coaching approach is a filter of who you are as a person, and the values that I have, and the principles that I like to follow. Um, so for me, what I've always been a believer of is that a leader needs to have a bit of skin in the game.
Okay.
And what I mean by that is you have to have a bit of you when you're taking that risk
Hmm.
of putting yourself out there, being a bit more vulnerable.
How take
And
yes.
yes, and that is your responsibility, and at the same time, it is your responsibility as a leader to be aware of your own blind spots.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
I think it goes back to when you said that some people, we assume that leaders are born a certain way, but learning about your blind spots and what you miss out on is a process of growth.
Yes, and but the issue usually happens, Raja, is that when people come into leadership roles, obviously there is one assumption that I did very well and hence I'm here.
Hmm.
And now I just need to be who I've always been,
Yeah,
and I
falling back on
continue
my
that.
natural skills,
Yeah.
that I'm good at, right?
Yeah, but the context suddenly changes because suddenly, if you are a new leader, the context was it was more about just me, my growth,
Hmm.
who I am, my principles, my values. But when you come into a situation where you have to start leading a team of two, or just one person, or six people, or 100 people, the context shifts really quickly and the people problems start becoming very real.
Hmm.
And you have to operate in a very different sort of a way. So for me, the coming back to your original question of what type of a coaching approach I take, it's a human first, deep understanding of who you are, as a person, as a leader, the values. So there's a lot of self discovery that allows you to be more sustainable as a leader in the organization versus just one time tick mark training.
What would you mean by sustainable? I don't think we see that in terms of leadership styles. Sustainability is a big thing for us in general about, the objectives of the business and how to sustain itself in different environments. But what is a sustainable approach to leadership?
Sustainable approach to leadership, of course, I'm not going into the area of planet first,
Hmm.
but I'm talking more about it is not a something static in time. It's not just a momentary thing. It's a way of life. It's a philosophy. Whether you have a big team, small team, or no team, it's a mindset itself. So you have to get into a leadership mindset and then continuously be a leader in every moment. And that's very important because there's a lot of frustration in organizations when the leader is, number one, maybe just giving you time and listening but not taking any decision,
Hmm.
or the leader seems to be a great person, very human,
Hmm.
but doesn't have enough courage to stand up when things go wrong.
Hmm.
um, so it's not about just being a good guy, you know, that, oh, if I'm a good person then suddenly I'll be a good leader. But those challenging moments will keep coming, so how do you consistently be present in that frame of mind is very important, and that's what executive coaching helps you to do, to self check yourself in those moments.
So I'm assuming then over here, when someone enters into a leadership role, they've managed their own work really well. They've met their objectives. They've been a high performer for a long time. They may even have a lot of cross-functional experience, having worked with different types of teams and so on. But when you step into a leadership role and then you have people directly reporting to you, that is a different type of ball game. It's not the same as I think this is a very common idea in the corporate world, which is that when we promote someone to leadership, we don't promote them on their capacity to manage teams and help people in their teams thrive and grow. But get promoted into leadership because they're good at the job that they're currently doing. And that's where that bridge between what is a good performer and who is a good manager, that's where that bridge comes, that divide happens. And executive coaching, from our conversation, I'm gathering, is the thing that bridges that divide, is that missing
Hmm.
component. And some of the things that we fit in the meantime has been, one-off trainings and attending a seminar here and there and so on, which is not what leads to a sustainable way in being able to keep, a high performing team going, keep people's motivations up. And also there's additional role that a manager gets that I think doesn't get talked about enough. Now you're responsible also for the way people grow in your team to further become
Yeah.
leaders on their own right. So we are talking about an inflection point of where a high performer turning into a manager. This has been the philosophy behind our program as we designed it together. So let's discuss a little bit what is an emerging leader? What's the criteria of an emerging leader? And that also will help our audience today understand that this program can help them in those kinds of ways, should they sign up for it and continue with us.
Perfect. So, the way I see emerging leaders is
Mm.
that these are the people that have been either been identified by the organization as being the future leaders
Hmm.
of the organization. They might be in a transitionary state. They're about to get that promotion. It's right there,
Hmm.
not there as yet, but they kind of need a bit of a push to get it.
Hmm.
Um, and these people are not just selected based on how they perform in their current roles, but based on what potential do they have as individuals to solve future organizational problems.
Okay. So
Yeah.
their
Um,
potential is something that's also been noted when that track
their
went.
potential has been noted. Yes,
Okay.
and that's the way organizations anyways should be doing it, because if you just if you just promote someone based on what they're doing right now,
Hmm.
then that's a bit off, because the future condition is going to be totally different. They'll have a bigger team, more responsibility, maybe more geographies to manage. Do you see the right ingredients in them right now that they will be able to handle that?
Okay.
Yeah. So there has to be a bit of future facing decision making when high potential resources are being selected in the organization. Yeah.
Yeah.
um, and the way organizations usually have that is that they usually have some sort of leadership criteria, some sort of like in some organizations it used to be called standards of leadership, that these are the
Okay.
values and the leadership qualities that people in our organization should be having, and then the resource needs to be evaluated on those, that yeah, they're kind of emerging on those, they're not there as yet or whatnot.
Okay.
And at the same time, these are people who are seen as a bit of risk takers in the organizations. And why do I talk about risk takers? Is because they're willing to challenge the status quo, to
Hmm.
bring in more innovation, to more creativity, and the way they work with people.
Hmm.
They use a lot of trust and responsibility and accountability to drive change in the organization. So, is there a bit of subjectivity attached to it? It shouldn't be a subjective
Okay.
decision.
Yeah.
There is because then if you go down that line, then all sort of leadership characteristics will sound subjective. Yeah. But in this case, it what I would say is, easily, if you want to identify them in the organization, these are the high potential ones. They're future focused. They bring in new ideas. They take the initiative, and somehow they might not be managing big teams, but you see it in them that they are not afraid to take on a new challenge, whether it is in the form of managing big teams or solving a problem.
Okay, so are these standards of leadership usually uniform across different organizations, or is that something an organization has to think about in the context of the geography that it operates in, or what their goals are? Or are there these organizations in Pakistan, and particularly we come across them through our work in the BBC, that are transitioning to a more professionalized type of organization. So they may have started off as a privately owned family business, and now they've seen a lot of growth. So
Mhm.
particularly that's true for the textile industry, but then there are all sorts of companies that are coming up in the transport sector, in the e-commerce sector, that are now trying to find their footing as
Hmm.
organizations that we would think of Unilever in terms of, or FMCGs in general. So I'm assuming that then those leadership goals might be a little different, and some challenges might be different depending on this kind of context.
So that's the bit, that it is going to be different in different contexts, depending on, like you just defined, some of the values related to what line of business you're in, what level of agility is required, what is the philosophy of the founder, um, and what is the culture of the organization. Yeah.
Ah,
And when I say culture of the organization, I essentially mean culture is the way you get things done in an
mhm.
organization. That's what a culture is. Unless your current culture really is horrible and you want to make it better, that is also another way to do it. That I would like to get things done this way. But don't do it the other way around of these are the five things that I want to have as culture, but you're not doing it in reality, then there's no point. So I rather say do it the other way around, have a conversation around as a leadership team, that
Hmm.
how do we get things done in our organization, and how would we want them to get done in the future, and then define what is your culture.
So
And the leadership characteristics then emerge from that, because then you essentially
yeah.
need to know that what traits hence do you require in order to drive that culture in the organization.
There's an assessment of your current practices and an understanding of, how things are done, from which you realize that, okay, this is the kind of like manager I would want leading my teams. And this
Yeah.
is, but some of the things that you mentioned, that adaptability and the drive to lead and to take risks, I think would apply generally to a lot of organizations, but perhaps at different degrees and with other
Yes.
characteristics attached to whatever situation that the organization is in.
Yeah.
Okay. So, before I ask my next question, I would like for the audience's sake to just say that the program that we are conducting does focus a lot on, especially the first session that we hope to have soon, with all of you joining us, focuses a lot on self-awareness and uncovering our unconscious biases, because that is where, like Sadaf mentioned, we can really notice what our blind spots are, and it helps us develop a stronger awareness of our own motivations, the way we connect with others, the way we align our goals with the general goals of the team. So Sadaf, could you give us some like specific examples of the types of tools and exercises that you would be using in this program? And of course, this won't be an exhaustive list. The program itself is introductory because we would want we assume that afterwards, if anybody would like to really pursue executive coaching for a longer amount of time, then different types of tools would be provided to them that adapt to their particular
Hmm.
circumstance. But in just general, what's in your repertoire when it comes to enhancing self-awareness and uncovering biases?
So I think the context I want to set here as well of the program is we are doubling down on inclusive leadership
Mm-hmm.
in this program. That's the bigger umbrella under which we want to create and execute this program. Um, and why inclusive leadership, and why that so specifically for emerging leaders, that context becomes quite important. That why are we getting, is it some sort of a DEI tick mark that we want to do, or is there something bigger behind it? The DEI context is important, it's part of it, but it's also a bigger piece than just that. And in case of inclusive leadership, because as an emerging leader, the biggest transition that most probably you would be going through when you're about to lead is you're going to be leading people. You'll be leading something or someone,
Yeah.
right? So being responsible for that someone requires a set of leadership skills. It's not just about showing up on time, holding yourself accountable, being responsible for your tasks, but how you show up in front of your team so that they get things done is the most important skill in this. So, the usual struggles and a new leader faces are, how do I delegate?
Hmm.
How do I delegate without losing my own shine in some cases? Or how do I delegate without wasting time? And that becomes the biggest conversation for new leaders. They really struggle with that. And the other piece is related to, how do I give feedback?
Hmm.
Yeah. And that becomes another big issue. Because in some cases, you're sometimes too sympathetic, or in some cases, you're too direct. So finding that balance
Yeah.
becomes very important. And the third piece, if you really want to be inclusive,
Yeah.
then you will have to be very courageous. And if you want to be courageous, then you will have to be vulnerable and you'll have to display it as a leader.
Vulnerable in a corporate environment.
Da, 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 da. That's the biggest piece in this. That why am I talking about vulnerability in
Hmm.
this case? Vulnerability is not about showing people your weaknesses.
It's not. Okay.
No. Yeah. So vulnerability is about coming across as somebody who's very honest about the challenges that they're facing
Hmm.
and where they might benefit from some support.
Okay.
Vulnerability is also about being very transparent with your team and your people around mistakes that you've made and what have you learned from them. So it's not about just sitting and mulling over, I made a mistake, ab hum khatam ho gaye, ab barbaad ho gaye, but you move quickly
Hmm.
from yes, this is the failure and what next. Now, why is this trait so important if you want to be inclusive?
Why is it?
This trait becomes extremely important because in order to be inclusive, to be an inclusive leader, you need to have psychological safety in the organization.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, if you yourself are not displaying some of the stumbles that you faced, the
Hmm.
rest of your team will feel कि यार best है we don't tell all any bad news to our boss,
Hmm.
and then the cycle continues. Yeah. They are not going to share. What does that mean for the organization? It means that bad decision making is going to happen. They're going to hide bad news from you. That means collective solutions will not be made, innovation will suffer because people feel that if we tell the boss, we will get reprimanded and we will get judged. So
Of
then the
course.
cycle continues,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And being vulnerable is not easy. Yeah, it does require a bit of risk.
It does.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it
absolutely.
does, right? Now, but if you really want to grow as an organization or as a leader,
Hmm.
where's the joy of becoming a leader without taking any risk? Then stick to being a manager.
Okay. So you're reaching a point here in the conversation where there's a difference between someone who's managing and someone who's leading. So, what do you think is the main difference between these two? And how do you see yourself
So,
as a leader as opposed to simply a manager?
so in case of a manager, it's somebody um, who will most probably have a leader or a
Hmm.
boss sitting on them, giving them the direction, and you're doing your best to manage the situation, right?
Okay.
Um, you might just try to solve what it is right now,
Hmm.
currently, because you kind of want to stay in the same place.
Yeah, you want to
Yeah.
maintain the status quo for
Yeah, you
yourself.
want to kind of
Um,
maintain things because that's what you need to manage. Because when you think of visually, when you think of manage, you feel something is disassembled and you're trying to kind of put it back together,
ah.
right? So that it reaches the certain consistency that you want. Yeah.
If you allow me, I think I can also just tell you what I think of when I think of managing something. Basically, a rather static situation with specific kind of parts. They move a certain way. You're in it, and then you basically try to work around those issues without having to really change the foundation of anything. So, if there's a specific type of culture, if you have hopes and dreams of transition, I think then that becomes very difficult when you are constantly trying to, veer in a specific direction, trying to maintain what, like I called it, the status quo. So would you consider
Hmm.
just managing as opposed to leading?
Leading managers, the most important thing comes in is being able to take steps forward.
Hmm.
Everything is forward. It has to keep moving in that direction. It's not about just staying in one space.
Hmm.
Because you move from staying in your comfort zone to the growth zone. That's the transition that's happening. Yeah. So you continuously put yourself in uncomfortable situations.
Okay.
That's the reality of being a leader. And when you're leading, you kind of setting the direction, and you will have willing followers.
Hmm.
And that becomes important, that in an organization, sometimes you don't have willing followers. You just have people who report into you, but they really don't respect you that much, or they are maybe just scared of you, and hence they're doing things, right?
That's a
Uh,
status quo. That's the culture that exists currently in a lot of organizations,
yeah.
unfortunately.
So that status quo will help you to grow only to a certain point.
Hmm.
Yeah. Um, Unless that's the objective you have as a founder, that listen, I'm happy in my little bubble. I like this little bit of 10% growth year on year. I'm happy, content, alhamdulillah, all is fine. And I just need people who keep executing this from A to B, A to B, A to B.
Hmm.
Yeah. Now, I'll give you an example of the most conventional example is of Steve Jobs, right? Which is related to his perception has always been that he was a tyrant. He was not forgiving. He would really come hard on people. It was his way or the highway. He was some sort of a micromanager because he had a certain eye for detail and etc. etc. Yeah. And he was somebody that they would label as a loud listener
A loud
versus a
listener.
quiet. And why reason why he was a loud listener? Because what he would do as a leader, he would walk in the room and
Yeah.
say something completely off tangent or something very controversial to force people to give him a reaction.
Okay.
Yeah. And if somebody comes in and says something ridiculous, you're like, what are you talking about? This can't happen, that can't happen.
Yeah.
And it kind of forces people to kind of
It
quickly
pokes
process, and
them, you know?
yeah,
It
it
shifts the
pumps them.
energy in the
Exactly.
room. Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, it provokes them. So that provocation is what he used to do. And what he was also very clear about is that if there is a failure and you're not going to tell me because you're scared of me or whatever, and if I find out later, then your life will be over. So that also sounds scary, but it's coming from a place of I'm giving you the full liberty to give me the bad news, but give me the bad news on time.
Okay.
Don't tell me when and I can't do anything.
Right. I mean, when there is a problem, when there is an issue, you bring it up then. And I think that ties back to what you said about being vulnerable as a leader yourself, because then you have to inculcate that in other people by practice, right? So
Yes, yes.
vulnerability is not something also that you can learn from a set of like 10 slides in PowerPoint.
Mm.
It is something that has to constantly be done and observed, and then it's when you get that skill, and obviously that leads to better adaptability. And in the context of the work that we do at CERB, we have sustainability. The SDGs came in, sustainability became a household name. Now ESG, which is changing the foundation of how a business runs. So instead of profit, now we have people, profit, planet. We have the triple bottom line. And we always say this at CERB in all our workshops and in our capacity building work that we do, that we are trying to change the way business works. The conventional business
Mm.
style has to make room for
Mm.
the evolving landscape in which Pakistani businesses are in, not just because of the way the country is, but globally, how trends have shifted. So we really need that adaptability and vulnerability. You can almost see it as like this hidden secret that leadership programs miss out on. And you realize that, oh, okay, that's the missing formula. That's the little thing that I didn't think of. And that comes through practice. So, yeah, I think this is really interesting. And I'm hoping that our audience is also learning a lot from this. And this is something that we will explore more in the program. But there must be like some like misconceptions that people have about inclusive leadership, and how do you plan to address that in the program as it comes up? And just generally, if there's any confusion about what links, if when you think of leadership, we do think of somebody who's a little bit magnanimous, a little bit more like, is able to function in diverse teams and things. But obviously, there's something that sets pure, simple leadership apart from the inclusive and dynamic environments in which
Hmm.
we want to see our leaders. So if you could
Hmm.
elaborate on that.
Sure. I'll also quickly tell you about the type of things that people will get exposed to during
Hmm.
this program so that they have some sort of a leadership toolkit for themselves to thrive in their organization. So,
Okay.
we will be using these self awareness tools. Um, uh, there's one tool called the Johari window, which is purely used to figure out your blind spots.
Hmm.
That's what it does, that's the job of it. There's another one which is called ladder of inference. What that does is it helps you to see that the decision that I took, was I taking that decision based on correct data or wrong data?
Okay.
And it helps you to reflect. And there's some flip it exercises that are very important. It's a tool that I find very useful, especially when you're dealing with your team. So when you're giving them feedback, then reverse it to see that what would you feel like if you would have said this to yourself, or what would you have felt like if you would have said this to your friend. So there
Hmm.
is the you and a friend angle in there, which is quite interesting to go through when you're doing it with, because at the end of the day, everybody's human. They're not
Yeah.
robots, so that everybody has these mushy feelings inside of them, boys, girls, or whoever. So we can't deny that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And some of the myths which are usually related to what is inclusive leadership is that maybe being inclusive means it's about being nice. Yeah. That's not what it is. It is about being fair, it's about being self aware, it's about being intentional. Yeah.
Being
In
fair,
your conversations.
yeah, self-aware and intentional. I think these are some
Yeah.
key words that we'll be going back to during our sessions as well.
Yeah, yeah. And then the other aspect which becomes quite important is people end up thinking maybe inclusive leadership is only for HR or the DEI teams. Yeah. So it's their
Yes.
thing. Let them figure it out.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the way they think.
It's become a
But
specialization, which is not what we're hoping for.
yeah,
Um,
exactly.
mhm.
So, but what we need to be sure of is that no, every leader is responsible for fostering inclusion. That's the reality of it. HR is not running the organization, the leader is. So if you are not going to be an inclusive leader, then God save you, because you're doing a disservice to your organization. Yeah. So all the research that has happened, there's a research done by Harvard Business Review as well around how 90% of the leaders in the organization, they feel that they're not giving enough time to themselves when it comes to leadership and development, and they feel that they are not as self-aware as they should be, especially when they hit times of crises.
Oh,
Yeah. So that point becomes quite critical. And then people also end up thinking that diversity, if you have a very diverse group of people in the form of gender, ethnicity, or some other aspects, then automatically it will become inclusive.
okay. Yeah.
But that's not what it is. Inclusion and belonging are two very different things.
How would
Yeah.
you define both of them?
So, in case some people end up using this terminology that I don't know how, not too relevant for Pakistan context because there's a context of a party,
We
but
covered it here, diversity, inclusion, belonging, and equity, all four of them being very different things, but in practice, they seem really similar and synonymous in the way we use them. But I would like to hear that
yes,
from you.
sure. So, essentially, inclusion is about you getting invited to a party.
Hmm.
Yeah. But belonging is you being invited to join them on the stage to have a little bit of a dance together as a team.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. So that's the way you can imagine it to be. So a lot of times, especially if the extreme example is always the European countries or in America, where the diversity is very visible. It's
right.
very visual diversity. In Pakistan, it's a bit tricky because we all kind of look the same, right? So that aspect is not too obvious over there. Obviously, we have the female and male gender divide, which is a more important aspect in Pakistan when it comes to the inclusive leadership discussion. So, in case of this part of the world, you might get hired because maybe they feel you bring the right insights from the right place, or simply because you're good. Yeah, you're a
Mhm.
great performer. But when you come in this in this environment, the first thing that hits you in the face
Hmm.
is how everybody is so different but the same as well. But the different part really comes up in front of you because culturally everybody is very different, or
Right.
the way they think is very different. And belonging becomes very important, not just around having a bit of a team lunch or doing some away day activity. It's not that. Actually, some people don't enjoy that too much because if they're introverts, they'll be like, no, thank you. I find that painful,
Yeah.
right? However, belonging is when you feel that what your point of view is about a certain problem or your opinion, it has space in the organization. Yeah.
Okay.
and
Yeah.
and that is what helps you to feel that you belong. And we should kind of just think of the way we feel when we're with our families. If we have functional families and we feel we belong there, is simply because you can be yourself. Your guards are a bit down, you're relaxed, you can give your opinion, you can have that little fight with your dad, you can kind of give a very strong opinion, right? So you, because you belong, they've given you that feeling of belong. It's very similar. I'm not saying run the organization like a family. I'm totally against that. It is not a family, guys.
No.
Otherwise we get very disappointed in those situations. But belonging comes from that place of allowing people to give their opinion without feeling that they will get reprimanded.
Hmm. Or
Yeah.
judged, I'm assuming, beyond the value that they bring to the team, assumptions that are not relevant to their performance or the way they interact with their teammates and clients, that all comes to the forefront. So belonging, I'm assuming, I did like the family example. I also don't think that we want to promote the idea that a company is like a family. We've read enough articles and seen enough
Yes.
TikTok videos against that whole idea. But being able to bring up something and knowing that it carries weight and it'll be considered and it'll be responded to accordingly is the kind of privilege that I think a lot of people shouldn't actually even be called a privilege. Hopefully, it does become a given, eventually in the way we run our corporate culture. But so that we are moving towards the end of our time, so I did want to focus a little bit on the chat box, which I saw was quite active for the past few minutes. So,
Hmm.
would you want to take some questions? I think what I can do is so if anyone wants to ask a question, I'm happy to read it out from the chat box, but I would also invite you to raise your hand and then I can unmute you and you can ask the question verbally if you would like that. We have another message. All right. Amreen Shah has joined us. Amreen, would you be okay if I unmute you and you can ask your question directly to Sadaf? I'm going to press the allow to talk button and see. It's a little bit of an experiment also right now because I'm not sure how comfortable everyone's going to be, but we have
Yeah.
this before. Um, but
If
chale,
you have the question from Ambreen, then maybe we can just
I think I'll just do that
kickstart.
then. Okay. So one question that she'd like to ask is how an emerging leader can navigate the transition from being responsible for oneself to being responsible for others and managing challenges faced that can uh, threat credibility of this new manager for the team. So any challenges that can threaten the credibility of somebody who is transitioning from being responsible for their own KPIs to being responsible for the growth of an entire team.
Hmm. So उसके अंदर जो सबसे critical aspect है, you have to have a point of view around how will you delegate and
Mhm.
how will you empower, because they're both connected to each other. That's the most important thing. Because now
Delegation and
suddenly,
power. Okay.
yes, in delegation and empowerment. And the reason why I call it out is because you were responsible for your own results, but now there are people who will have to execute it for you. And suddenly you're dependent on other people to be a high performer.
Yeah.
So you have to kind of be mentally clear about it. You won't have time to continue doing it yourself. That is the reality of it. So, as a first step, either get hold of enough literature or get hold of some models that give you structured way of how do I delegate and how do I empower, or get a coach that could help you to do that.
Right.
um,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, that's the most important aspect, I would say.
So seeing the difference between being responsible for yourself and being depending on having your performance depend on the performance of others. So that difference is what we need to clarify in our minds. Yeah. And I think then that also will help us like not just see a task that needs to be executed, but how can we enable the person to execute that task? So it's not just at the end of the day the result, but the
Yes.
process as well. That's
Yes, spot on.
all right. And I would also like to ask a question from Sajid Rashid. How do you ensure that leadership styles are adaptable to the unique needs and perspectives of employees in the Pakistan cement industry? I think you can also give this as a more of an overview of how industries can adapt leadership principles to their specific context.
So again, depends on the nature of the industry. So sometimes some organizations are very tech led. So over there, the way they will run things, it will be very agile. They will have scrum teams. It's very pilot trial based as a system. It will be very lean. So the environment and the vibe will be really different. Yeah.
Hmm.
But for example, if it's a manufacturing organization, maybe they've been in the business for 50 years, 60 years, or even more and beyond.
The more
That
traditional.
more traditional
Yeah.
in there, maybe more engineering led,
Hmm.
uh, industrial marketing or industrial business management. The context obviously becomes very different because over there, processes become super important.
Hmm.
And processes are a form of communication. That's what it is. A process is communication, whether we like it or not. Yeah.
A nice way to
Uh,
look at
yeah.
it.
So obviously, if it goes into an overdrive, then it turns into bureaucracy and then red tape and God knows what. But the initial reason why processes were created were because it's very difficult to communicate in a large organization with 5,000 employees. So you need a process so you can communicate. Right. So
Hmm.
in a process led organization, then the most important element will be how quickly are you going to take a decision to keep things moving forward.
Hmm.
That context becomes quite important. And in there, then honesty, transparency become super high because there are processes in there. Some people will try to bypass them because it's taking too much time. And for something like a cement industry, there will be a lot of external government contracts or something or the other. Then that's another ball game. So then over there, as a leader, you have to have um, the ability to do stakeholder management. Now that becomes a very important aspect of for an emerging leader as well. that ठीक है delegation कर लिया, empower कर लिया, लेकिन जो मेरे ऊपर लोग हैं या people who are external, जिधर से I'm very dependent on, how do I manage them?
Hmm.
And that is a separate skill altogether of how can you better prepare yourself to manage key stakeholders. And that's also part of our program. I think we've touched upon it as one of the key highlights.
Yeah, yeah. So, definitely a different ball game, but very important nonetheless. Actually, it's quite interesting that we did end up talking about external stakeholders because our next question is from somebody who does work in government relations, for now PDP, which is so in Pakistan now PDP is a pretty big organization in the nonprofit sector, working towards the inclusion of persons with disabilities through economic empowerment. So Shadab's question is that Sadaf, आपने पहले mention किया था earlier that about introversion. There's a growing consensus, and some studies also suggest that introverted leaders are now better suited for the ever-evolving world because they tend to reflect, analyze trends, generate sympathy, and make decisions after a thorough process. It might differ from person to person, but she would love to hear your thoughts on
My favorite topic.
it.
I try to be brief, otherwise we can do another conversation on introverts. Um, so I think what we have to keep in context is extroverts and introverts both help organizations to thrive. Because if we really want to be inclusive, then they both have their strengths. Again, depending on the context, right?
Okay.
In case of you can be, I don't know which nice word to use, but you can still be an asshole and be an introvert, but you can also be a good guy and be an extrovert. It doesn't mean extroverts are like, oh my god, they're too much in my face. That's not what it is. But the thing is that in some situations you need somebody instantly taking a decision and driving the team to moving forward. Naturally, extroverts are very good in such situations.
Okay.
Right? But when it comes to a very complex problem that requires that level of thinking, that requires that level of people management, that introverts are super useful. They come in
Hmm.
very handy in those situations itself. A lot of creative people are introverts. They create their best work when there's not a lot of noise
Hmm.
around them, right? So it depends on that situation. But yes, for introverts, the reason why I'm so passionately trying to help introverts get a voice, literally, is kind of breaking the mold that leadership just has to be loud and noisy and entering a room and saying, here I am. Those things, for an introvert, it intimidates them because then they feel they really can't lead, because
Hmm.
that's the criteria. And the type of feedback sometimes we end up getting is that you need to be more visible, you need to communicate with impact, you have to drive your team harder, or you need to give them space, or you don't talk too much in important meetings. And this feedback sometimes introverts take as, oh, but they're telling me to be someone I'm not,
Hmm.
and I can't fake it. Or they say, okay, fine, I will fake it till I make it. But that leads to burnout.
Right.
Yeah.
It
So
sounds
the
like a lot
intervention
of
is needed.
pressure. Sounds like a lot of pressure to change and to
Yes.
be something
Yes.
else. Yeah. But would you then, come to this consensus that perhaps the style of leadership that we've normally associated with a conventional leader in the corporate sector kind of now makes a lot of room for introversion because of how things have changed, evolved so fast in the past few years? Post-COVID, obviously, with flexibility and so on, but also with the changing requirements of what the responsibilities of a business are now, which include its social and environmental, the systems in which it operates.
Yeah. So I would never say that an introvert is the best leader as a leadership. I will never say that, because there are positives, negatives to both. I've seen myself. I'm a very deep rooted introvert, and I've seen in places where अगर वो मुझ पे लेते तो मैं थोड़ा वक्त extra लेती
Okay.
right? But in that moment they actually needed somebody who's very like, no guys, let's get people together, and I'm like, oh my god, I need space, I want to go into my cubicle and get things done. But that's something I would never say. um, but there is a book by the name of Quiet, written by a lady named Susan Cain. Now, she is the pioneer in terms of really going deep into contemporary introversion in a leadership environment. That's the book I would say everybody should get hold of, because it gives you very interesting traits in itself. And it kind of tells you as well. She even says things like the guy who ran Enron, the infamous Enron scandal in US, he was an extrovert. Now, okay, what she's essentially implying is that in moments where you should have been less hawkish,
Hmm.
where you should have taken a time to think back that if you do this you will destroy the families in US and have a financial crisis. But in that aspect you just went in and ended up taking risk and risk and risk and risk. Yeah.
Hmm.
So a bit of an introvert in that area could have saved the day essentially.
Yeah, a little bit tapping into your introverted side, which I'm sure everyone has. We're a spectrum of different
Yes,
personality traits.
exactly.
The other questions that we have are more or less going to be answered in the program that we are launching. So I would like to take the next 5 minutes to first really thank Sada for her time for this interesting conversation. Feedback from our audience has also been very heartening, for which I would like to thank everyone who's here. And then I would also like to just talk very quickly about the program itself and what to expect next before I invite the head of CERB, Nazir Sheikha, to speak for a few minutes to close the session off. So we are going to be opening registrations almost immediately after this webinar is over. The registrations are open to everyone who is working in Pakistan. It can be from the public sector, private sector, either is fine, but we are going to be taking a slightly more corporatized and professionalized approach to how business should run. But that means that we will also be talking about people who are leading in a transitory environment. Naturally, because of DNI, ESG, sustainability, but also because of Pakistan's economic backdrop, which impacts all business leaders. The executive coaching program is going to introduce you to the tools that you would need for inclusive leadership. But then we hope that if you would like to pursue your own path, you take the time to reflect on what you've learned from each of the sessions and how you would then like to proceed. You are welcome to ask questions from me or my team at CERB. You can reach out to either me directly or you can reach out to CERB through our social media, our email address, etc. All of the information will be available in a poster that I will be emailing out with all the information that you need to register to all the participants here and also sharing that on our social media. We are going to be having 3 online sessions that will be spaced apart by a month. The first one will be launched next month, and then the second one will take place a month after that, and the third one so on. We also hope that when we have Sadaf in the country, we can do a catch-up session in person, which will be a short networking session, and then you can discuss some of the goals that you uh, probably thought of after the third session is over and before the in-person connect takes place. There will be a one-time fee of 50,000 plus tax for all the sessions together, so you don't have to pay for each session separately. And you are free to send the registration form to your teams. You're free to connect us to the people who manage talent management and leadership training, organizational development, and we can then sort out the different technicalities so that your registration process is smooth. And registrations will be open until I think about a week before the first session takes place. So thank you very much. Thank you for your kind words in the chat to the audience. Thank you, Sada. Nazish, if you're here with us, we would love to hear from you and help us conclude for today.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right. Hi. Hello, everyone, to the audience, and thank you all for staying on. It has been a good session. I've learned quite a bit about vulnerability and about introverts and extroverts. I have a feeling that Sadaf's coaching sessions helps both introverts and extroverts by sort of understanding, the other's perspective as well. So if you're an introvert, you sort of understand, or are able to relate more to what an extrovert is and sort of help yourself manage yourself in that way. And then if you're an extrovert, you're able to recognize that inclusivity means including the introvert in your conversations as well, in your discussions. But I am looking forward to this. In CERB's perspective, we talk about leadership and inclusive leadership a lot, and when we talk about discussions and it comes up in many areas about activities that we do. In the employers of choice gender diversity scorecard, we have basically an entire section based on leadership and looking at what sort of approach the leader is taking towards gender diversity. It's an important area that we focus in. And then, when we look at gender diversity, and when we look at goal 10, reducing inequality and those discussions as well, again, leadership comes up. And it's coming up a lot nowadays because even though there is some backlash from certain parts of the world, I'm not going to go into those parts, but it's coming across because it's now good for business, right? If you want to ensure that you get the most out of your workforce, and if you want to keep your workforce happy, and if you want to ensure that your business adapts to a changing mind environment, you need to have an inclusive approach, which basically uh, looks at ensures that your workforce remains agile and adaptive. So I have a feeling that these coaching sessions will help prepare those all of you who choose to go through for this to be more inclusive and more adaptive. And sometimes it's these small sessions that help identify clarity for yourself as well, in the sense that clarity of where you want to go next. So and often, at times we are all lacking in that clarity wherever we are, what stage of the journey you are. I think Sadaf mentioned it well. She from her position, after having achieved so much and gone ahead, she was looking for that clarity, and perhaps in her learnings, it's these sort of sessions that helped herself as well. So my if you now I'm going to hand over to Raja, and as Raja will be doing the if you have any questions, do reach out to us, and we look forward to hosting this cohort at CERB. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nazish. Thank you to our audience. So I will reach out immediately after this with more details on how you can sign up. I've added the link to the registration form. It's a bit.ly link, so just shortened QT-CERB 25. When you sign up here, there'll be a form to fill out, and then for the payment process, I'll reach out to you once I receive your registration. And I'd also like for you to explore a little bit about Sadaf's background and what executive coaching is through the website of her company, which is called Quiet Thrivers. And prepare yourself with some things that you would like to bring to the sessions, some reflections that you on the challenges that you face and what you would like to, what you would like would be the outcomes of your time with us in these sessions. I think I will conclude here. Thank you so much, Sadaf. Thank you so much, Nazish. And thank you to the audience.
Thank you.
We look forward to having you join us. I think we can stay for a little picture, Sadaf and Nazish. So I think both of you should keep your cameras on. And I
That's
will
fine.
take a photo.
That's fine. Can I just say one thing? It's a bit of a combination of
Sure.
leadership and vulnerability, and why it's helpful. It's a saying. They say
Hmm.
that even if you fall on your face, you're still moving forward. So it's
I love
perfectly
that.
fine.
That's okay. And we're all able to get up and move forward. So also, once you get a little bit of embarrassment out of your system, then you just stop being embarrassed after that. So
Yeah.
yeah. All right. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Even if you fall on your face, you're still moving forward. So it's
I love
perfectly
that.
fine.
That's okay. And we're all able to get up and move forward. So also, once you get a little bit of embarrassment out of your system, then you just stop being embarrassed after that. So
Yeah.
yeah. All right. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.